Well, for more now, let's go to our guest, Yaakov Lapin, military and strategic affairs analyst, joining us from Rehovot in Israel. Yaakov, thanks so much for coming on to the show. The IDF has arrested several Palestinians in the West Bank village of Silwad in recent hours. There were unconfirmed reports that they were planning attacks. What more can you tell us about this?
I think we have to put these arrests in the greater context of what's been going on the ground, and that is a series of very determined, very focused counterterrorism raids throughout the West Bank, throughout East Jerusalem, by security forces. We're seeing a real coming together of the IDF, of the Shin Bet Domestic Intelligence Agency, which is guiding these efforts and making them very pinpoint. And at the same time, there's a real effort not to interfere with the fabric of life and the ability of ordinary Palestinians to come to Israel to make a living, to worship during Ramadan. So these arrests, we don't have the details of what the plot was that these suspects were involved in. It's too soon to make any confirmed assessments of that. But we are seeing a very determined approach by the Israeli defense establishment to nip terror plots in the bud.
And what is the IDF doing to prevent attacks of this nature, especially ahead of Passover on Friday?
So there are two main different kinds of threats that the IDF is dealing with. One is the threat of the lone wolf attacker or the small cells. And actually, these have been the kinds of terror incidents that we've seen since this latest wave has begun. Every attack that has occurred until now has been carried out not by an established terrorist faction, but either by a lone wolf or by small cells that leave a very small trail behind, if at all. And that makes it very hard for the intelligence net to pick up on. So the IDF is stepping up together with the Shin Bet attempts to flag these individuals where possible, bring them in for preemptive questioning and arrests. There have been uses of administrative detention. And there's a real effort to stop these kinds of terrorists, not only from acting, but also from coming across from the West Bank. So we're seeing major stepped up efforts to plug the holes in the seam line barrier and to really inject security forces in all places where they can cross. And the other kind of terrorism is the organized nature. And here, the defense establishment is actually on much more familiar ground. It foils around 500 to 600 of these kinds of attacks every year. And it's got a very good idea on how to do that. And
to march on Jerusalem this Friday, is that what you're hearing too from your end?
Yes, they're issuing those calls, but I think that what's interesting is what they're not saying compared to last year. They're not issuing ultimatums. They are not showing that they have an appetite for a direct clash between the Gaza Strip and Israel. And that, I think, is very interesting and very telling, because last year, prior to the escalation, Hamas was issuing some very clear ultimatums, and it was making clear that it was interested in confrontation. And this time around, Hamas has no appetite for that kind of direct escalation. So it would like to see the West Bank ignite with violence, absolutely, because that would not only kill Israelis, which is in line with Hamas ideology, it would also undermine its rival, the Palestinian Authority. But as for Gaza itself, Hamas wants to keep Gaza out of the line of fire at this time, and that's what those calls are telling us.
And finally, Yaakov, what can we expect over the next coming weeks?
It's very difficult to know. If the current pause in attacks continues, then there will be a good chance for this wave of violence to settle down and to be quashed until the next explosive time arrives. But if the attacks, even if they're only lone wolf attacks, if these continue, then that could end up sparking an escalatory dynamic, and nobody knows how far that would go. So if the quiet continues and the lack of attacks due to all the efforts that we just discussed continues, then there will be a good chance for this wave to subside.
Thank you so much for your time, Yaakov Lapin, there, military and strategic affairs analyst, joining us from Israel. Thank you.